Good evening, everyone. Good evening. If folks can find a seat and give it a... All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Erin Zwerko. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town. And thank you for joining the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, the Department of Planning and Development, and our consultants, North Star Planning and FB Environmental, for our last community conversation that is intended to help shape the Yarmouth Comprehensive Plan update. If you're not familiar with the Comprehensive Plan, it's a document with a long-range view that guides municipal policy, growth, and investment over the next 10 to 20 years. You might have hit the light. Sorry. It got very atmospherical in here. So the planning process incorporates a community's vision and values along with the latest data on topics such as housing, transportation, recreation, economy, historic resources, and fiscal health. Our last comprehensive plan was adopted in 2010, so it's time to move on to an updated document. In September, we held community conversations on housing and on the economy. In many ways, the previous sessions are focused on the built environment and where growth could be directed and how it should be supported. Tonight's discussion on natural resources and the environment can provide that counterpoint to what was discussed at the previous workshops. If the 2010 comprehensive plan provides any guidance for us now in 2023, it is that the town values those open spaces, the rural spaces, and the varied natural resources that we have here in town. We see that with the bold adoption of a climate emergency declaration and the work of the Yarmouth Climate Action Task Force to develop the town's first climate action plan. Tonight is one of the first steps to considering how the town might balance all of those priorities. That conversation continues next Tuesday, that's October 10th, with the Climate Action Plan's Community Action Workshop, and then to November 13th when we reconvene for Plan Yarmouth's Future Land Use Workshop. The feedback that we receive from tonight's event and from these upcoming events will help the department, the consultants, and the steering committee narrow in on those high-level goals that we can then develop strategies and actions from. So tonight, following a presentation from Bina Skordis and a brief Q&A, we will divide up into guided table conversations and activities. The goal of the activities is to have community members consider how we meet our various goals for the environment and natural resources, as well as thinking long-term in terms of resiliency and adaptation and mitigation. There are reference materials at each table, and there are also large format maps around the room that can be viewed for reference. After the completion of the table activities, we will reconvene and ask each table to report out regarding their findings and what they discussed. So as with the previous two community conversation, tonight's presentation and report out will be recorded and activities will be adapted for online participation. Continue the conversation online if you have that light bulb moment later this evening or even later this week or in next week even. Or if you can't join us for the upcoming events. And some logistical items, the two double doors at the back of the room will lead you to the restrooms. And at the front of the room, please help yourself to some beverages and some snacks. And finally, I'd like to thank Patriot Insurance for continuing to allow us to hold these events here in their great meeting space. We definitely appreciate it. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Bina. If you've been to the previous community conversations, this one will be a little bit longer. We'll take a short break and then dive into the table discussions. So without further ado, Bina, thank you.
Thank you. As she mentioned, I'm Bina Skordis. I work for FB Environmental, and we're here today to talk about the environment and natural resources. Someone already mentioned that it seems like we're going to try and talk about a lot of things, and we are. So we wrote the natural resources and the marine resources chapters, and then we did all the mapping, and this obviously touches the agriculture piece, the chapter, as well as recreation and open space and a lot of other elements. So we'll talk about those as we go. I'm just gonna scoot through these, and not all the slides are this wordy. You don't have to read them, but I just wanted to pull out some highlights from the natural resource chapter that we found. So the town of Yarmouth does have a detailed mapping program to monitor invasive plant species, and someone was mentioning this 2 minutes ago about how well that's been going for the town, and it's important as we think about climate change and warming temperatures that may further facilitate the spread of invasive species, which would of course threaten the biodiversity of Yarmouth's natural communities. All surface waters in Yarmouth are classified as Class B. Again, you don't need to know all these things, but it's important to think about what that means for the town of Yarmouth. Some communities are working really hard to get their surface waters to a Class B standard or keep it at a Class B standard, so Class B isn't a bad place to be. I think it's just important to recognize that though freshwater quality in Yarmouth is currently meeting state standards, why is it meeting it, and what do we need to do to ensure that it continues to? And groundwater quality in Yarmouth is generally good. The town is expecting to update several protections in the near future, including the floodplain management ordinance after new FEMA maps are released, and the addition of low impact development requirements as part of the MS4 permit. MS4, we'll get into it a little bit more, but just so that you know, it's municipal separate stormwater sewer system, so 4 S's, it's a mouthful, but towns who are covered under that permit are required to develop, implement, and maintain and enforce a stormwater management plan with the goal of reducing discharge of pollutants from the community to the extent possible to protect water quality. Erosion and sediment controls have also recently been strengthened in several ordinances, and a number of studies have been conducted in recent years to explore options to improve fish passage on the Royal River. Efforts are now being led by the Army Corps of Engineers in partnership with the town of Yarmouth. I think where Erin's standing, there's a pad of paper that there's a question related to this. It'd be great if at some point tonight you could go over and just jot down some notes of what you think about this issue in town. And I think there's a few maps on your tables. I know that I tried to zoom in on some of these maps so that you could see them a little bit better, but I just wanted to dig into some of the data and some of the numbers that we found while we were looking through the resources within your town. So coastal bluff stability, the Maine Geological Survey has done a lot of mapping of coastal bluffs around the area. Some of these maps are a little outdated, and so they recognize that they do need to be updated, but as of the last time they were able to map them, they recognized that about 40% of the bluffs in Yarmouth were unstable to highly unstable. And so sea level is gradually rising along the coast of Maine. The rise in the ocean allows for the waves to sort of erode the beach and the coastal bluffs. And over time, that removes material from the base of those bluffs. And, the sediments at the base are the ones that stabilize it. And so when those get removed, you can expect more landslides to occur. I was fortunate enough last week to go out on a boat with the Maine Geological Survey and some folks from a few island communities, and we looked at where there were threats to coastal erosion and bluff erosion specifically. And what we noticed a lot of was we would see these beautiful green lawns right up to the edge of those bluffs, and that's where the erosion was. And that's why we need things like shoreline zoning, right, to make sure that we have trees at the edge, that important vegetation to really hold together that land. And I think it's just an important thing to remember as we work with our residents to do a lot of education and outreach to understand. I know the view is really pretty, but keeping your house, standing is also important. So how can we educate and, understand those concerns and work with each other to get there? So some land conservation. I know that you all know this, but Yarmouth is recognized as a local leader in land conservation in the area, with well over 700 acres of open space and about 314 acres permanently protected as conservation land through easements. this is an important piece to think about as we think about how we want those connections to grow or change or develop moving forward. So, I think a lot of towns think about, do you care more about connectivity of your open spaces for habitat, or are you more concerned about, accessibility, or can you achieve a few different things as you're planning and mapping out where your conservation and recreation areas should be? So that'll be something to think about and look at as we dig into these maps during the activities here in a little bit. So moving into water. So this is, surface water again. So Yarmouth is part of that MS4 permit, and that regulates stormwater discharge for communities of a certain density. And Yarmouth actually belongs to a group of Greater Portland communities that have formed the interlocal stormwater working group to implement this program. And I think they're in year 1 of a 5-year permit that requires implementation of 6 control measures. So those include things like community outreach and education, as well as understanding where any illicit discharge detection is and making sure that you identify those and work to eliminate them. And also working with construction site stormwater runoff control and post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment. And a big piece of this is also the pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. And again, I heard this earlier tonight already, that working with municipal operations to make sure that they have the capacity to do these things is one thing that's really important. And so when a town gets, is covered under the MS4 permit, they get more funding in some ways, but they also have more work that they need to do to ensure that they can comply with these permits. And so that's another thing we really need to think about as we get to the priority game or activity tonight. We all have so many priorities of what we want to see in our town. And I think when people think of housing versus open space, it can seem like they're at odds with each other. But I think as long as we're having these conversations, being at odds is maybe a good thing, because that means that we're talking about them both and how can we work together to find how they both fit in our community. So moving over to marine resources, I guess there's a lot of marine resource habitats here. You know that you have really good eelgrass beds and great habitat for the endangered roseate tern. And I guess one thing I really noticed when I was looking through this was that the water quality monitoring has revealed some high levels of bacteria and nitrogen. I get those DMR emails often that tell me when there's closures in the shellfish beds. And so I think it's important to recognize where those are, what's driving those, and how can we address those moving forward. And one question that we did get, I was looking through the questions that we received from some of the committee members, and one was, will the comp plan include new goals for marine resources, such as protecting tidal marsh migration corridors? Will it address climate change priorities, such as proper sizing of tidal culverts to allow for fish passage and flow of tidal waters in and out of marshes? I think that's a perfect question to help us understand what are the priorities of this town. How can we incorporate that type of, concern into how we move forward? I think culvert crossings is one of my personal favorite things to think about to help water flow through a community is so important. And I think it's one of those overlooked things. There's also a lot of money for culvert crossing, for right-sized culverts. So it's a great project to think about. And, again, recognizing, can my town implement it? What does that mean? What is it solving? What are the goals? And how do I make sure that that's a priority? Again, back to the shellfish. So previously highly harvested species such as soft shell clams have experienced declines in landings, while other sectors, I think you've all seen a lot more oyster farms and those type of aquaculture. Those are on the rise around here. And the town is working on several improvements to marine water access and adjacent parks to meet the goals of past planning efforts. So again, looking at our open space plan, looking at how we recreate, how we access our open spaces and our marine resources is important. So some threats to marine water quality. Again, I know I say stormwater a lot, but stormwater runoff is a big threat. And, as we continue to see these more dramatic storms that come really fast with a lot of intensity, our infrastructure isn't able to absorb that water, and instead we'll see a lot of intense runoff, and that short period of time doesn't have time to infiltrate, and so it causes more surface erosion and carries additional pollutants into nearby waters. And another question that we received that I wanted to touch on here was, what is the town going to do based on these new low-impact development rules, and how will this affect planning decision moving forward? I think that's another great question of, digging into low-impact development rules. Who is that affecting? What is the goal of them? How do we incorporate them authentically, and how do we communicate about them? And so I'm sure you guys have some questions about what those are and how we do them, and we can talk with Erin, and as we develop our plan, understand if that's really a priority, and recognizing what the rules are under the MS4 permit versus can we take it one step further, or how do we support our planning staff to understand what they can and cannot do. And here just a lot of facts on all the recreation you have here. I think you have a robust recreation network, and it's great because I think there's a lot of accessibility for folks. And so I just wanted to point that out. I'm not going to talk through all of those, but I did want to sort of touch on the climate change impacts on recreation. So there does need to be sort of a conversation around which ones are threatened from sea level rise, and how can we prepare for those? What does that look like? What does that investment look like? And when do we take that investment and move forward? I also think it's interesting to think about that the increase, any change in temperature might change the way we recreate. So are our really hot days in the summer, is that going to push us more to different types of activities in the summer? Where will we want to recreate? What does that look like? And, with less snow in the winter that we're seeing, are we going to be able to cross-country ski the same way that we do now? How can we utilize our spaces effectively and efficiently moving forward? And I think one piece that I know the town really cares about and talks about is access. So that's why I'm going to keep bringing it up tonight, is how are people accessing these spaces, especially, public water. I think I spent a lot of time out west, and I know that public land is plentiful out there, and it was really easy to touch, feel, play in great open spaces. And I've found in Maine, it's a lot harder to find where to get to the ocean. How can I play outside too? How can I get those same benefits that other people have? And so I think towns are increasingly finding it more important to create those spaces and facilitate that for people. And then agriculture and forestry, I just wanted to end with this one. So these are just some high-level climate change impacts that we might see. So increasing temperatures and shifting precipitation patterns are going to continue to pose challenges to the farming industry, including shifts in the growing season, periods of drought, and potential shifts in the plant hardiness zones. We might see some sea level rise impacting prime farmland areas. And then again, that increased pressure from non-native and invasive pests might drive out our critical ecosystems that I know we've seen this a lot before. Again, when I was on that boat last week, we were looking at Great Diamond Island, and there was a lot of emerald ash borer had really destroyed a lot of big trees. That was pretty sad to see. So I know it's sad to end it on that note, but I just wanted to give some high level on the ag and forestry. I know this isn't specific for tonight, but I just think it's important to recognize that, recreation, open space, natural resources, marine resources, freshwater resources, it's all connected, and how can we prioritize, plan, and think about how it all connects to each other, especially given the last two community conversation you guys have had with economy and housing. Where did you come to there, and how can this be incorporated? And let's not look at them in silos. Let's think about how we can move forward with one comprehensive plan.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Do I walk away?
So we do have some time for question and answer. My name's Ben Smith, and I work at North Star Planning, and we're part of the planning team working with FB Environmental on the comprehensive plan, along with Camoin Associates and Levine Planning Solutions. So this is the only microphone in the room that comes over the speakers, and this one doesn't. But what I'm going to do is ask folks to just raise your hand if you have a question. I'll walk around with this microphone so the audio recording picks it up, and then Bina will repeat the question over the microphone so everybody can hear it. Okay? So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll take several questions here before we get into the table work.
The presentation on recreational uses, I don't see any differentiation between active recreation and passive recreation. And was the thinking that that was too fine-grained, or that it's not a meaningful distinction? If it's the latter, I would strongly disagree.
So there was a question on active versus passive recreation and how we quantify that. And yeah, this is just a really high level slide, and I agree. So we did write that we have 27.58 miles of urban, rural, and riverside trails. So that's more of the, I would say, passive recreation. We did mention at the bottom the boat launch and the ice, the beaches, and then you have a lot more of your and the acres of open space maintained, and then more of those baseball fields, playgrounds, et cetera. So I do think it's important to recognize that they're both there, and how we manage them may look differently, and what are the values of them. So I don't think I am answering your question, but it's all in the plan. It's all in our inventory chapters. This presentation is just pulling out the high level bullet points.
Hi, is it working? Yes. I'm part of the Royal River Alliance, and our mission, our vision is to free the Royal and give the environment a chance to heal. And you have a slide where you talked about the waters of Yarmouth being Class B, but I just wanted to really share with the group tonight that last summer our organization worked with the state, and we tested the impoundment, the Elm Street impoundment, and found that for long periods of time the dissolved oxygen was well below the state requirement for Class B. So as we think about what our priorities are tonight, I just wanted to put that out there, not leaving people with the idea that the river is meeting the standard. It's not. And I'm more than happy to share with anybody the data. The state has validated the data, so we just happen to miss the list that comes out periodically. So
I can speak. So she's mentioning that the water quality within the Royal River is not meeting the Class B standard based on some findings she found with the DEP last year, which is accurate. We were just waiting for the publishing of those data. And so I did write that we need that updated data to confirm that status. And I do think it's really important that we will incorporate that. And I talked to some folks at the DEP when we were writing this chapter a couple months ago, and she mentioned that as well. And so I do think that's a really important point to note it. And how towns meet those standards is varied, and how they measure. And so I think dissolved oxygen tells a big story around what's going on in there. So thanks for sharing that. We'll incorporate that data.
On your water quality, are you differentiating between last year being an extraordinarily dry year, no rain, and everything was so low, and this year didn't stop raining?
Yeah, water quality data is not looked at in a snapshot, so it's often, whether it's a year, 5 year, or 10 year, the DEP requires you to look at longer terms, so it's not just a snapshot. So yeah, that's a great question, and we do look at sort of the whole comprehensive, how's the water doing, and we look at surface water. It has a lot of different data around that versus marine estuary waters. So yeah.
Nina, can you just give us an overview of what the plans are regarding the dam removal or not? Or is that, if that's too long a question?
No, he was asking if I can explain the plans for dam removal or not. As far as I know, it's in the Army Corps of Engineers' hands, and I know that the town's working with them. I don't know if Aaron wants to speak more on that.
Sure. So it is the evaluation is under the Army Corps' review right now. They are working to complete an environmental assessment on on plans to restore the ecology of the rivers which could include removal of dams or some of the dams or leave the dams in place. So that review, they are currently sort of scoping out the different topics around critical items that they need to consider. So not just, the health of fish in the Royal River or the dissolved oxygen and improving actually the water quality of the river, but also expanding towards historic and archaeological resources that might be along this river, which is a focal point and has provided sort of that focal point for the community for many years, dating even before white settlement. So there's a lot of elements that they're researching and need to assess, pull that all together and make a recommendation in the environmental assessment. I will note that we did just post an article on the town's website that provides an update on where the Army Corps is and what they will be doing in the future. So it's pretty high level, and I'm probably not explaining all of the intricacies of this review, but the town is continuing to partner with the Army Corps to make sure that we are having a seat at the table and providing that agency the best information that we can. Thanks, Bina.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, but I first will just comment very briefly that the two things going on right now with the Army Corps is they're doing a sedimentation study of the impounded waters behind the two dams to see if there's any pollutants buried down in the mud.
I'm going to pause you there so I can repeat that part, or else I'm going to forget. The Army Corps is doing a sedimentation study on the impoundment there.
They're doing it this week, actually.
This week?
Yeah.
Currently.
And the second thing, the big thing that they're doing is they're creating a 3D model of the river, a computer model, so that they can play with variables like the amount of water flow and what the impact might be if you took out at one or both of the dams or partially took them out. They'll be able to run 1,000 what-if scenarios to kind of see what the impact of making changes in the river will be.
The Army Corps is also doing a 3D model to determine what those impacts could look like. We're doing this in another project too, so it's very fun. Yeah. Those 3D models are fun.
Yeah, it's quite a sophisticated model, as
yeah.
I understand it. But my question really was in regards to the comprehensive plan and working on environmental and natural resource issues, what action steps might follow, or are there going to be recommendations for specific action steps as a result of the plan?
He's asking if there's going to be, specific action items that come out of this related to natural resources, and the answer is yes. How we generally do these comprehensive plans, so we'll spend some time looking at what you guys have done so far, what planning's in place, what have the goals been, have they been met? You guys had an open space plan completed a few years ago. How can we incorporate that? What has been achieved from that, what hasn't, and if it hasn't been achieved, is there a reason why, or is that not prioritized? And coming out of this, we'll definitely, I think you'll see today you have a priority matrix on your second page on your activity, and I think that'll help inform us what are those details. We can't say everything should have an action item next to it, right? The town doesn't have the capacity for that. So what are some specifics, actions that can come out of these conversations, and out of the data, out of Erin's office, what's working, what's not working, and how does that work with the housing development? How does that work with economic development? How do we make sure that if we have a goal here and a goal here, are they at odds of each other, or can they work together? So yes, there'll be goals and strategies. Okay.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. I just have a quick question. How is air quality also monitored when you're looking at this, when you're developing this plan? I'm concerned about emissions that are still put into the air from our station, our power station. Thank you.
Great question. She said I did a good job, and then just kidding. No, she asked if air quality was being taken into consideration, as I didn't mention it at all. And yes, it is. We don't have much of that data right now, but we will incorporate it. I know that on the climate action plan, they're also really going to emphasize that, and so I was sort of saving that to see what data they come up with, because I didn't want to, misuse resources and look at the same data they are. So I think we will be informed by them, they will be informed by us, and so yes, look forward to that.
And we'll get you. You use the term low impact development. What does that mean?
Do you want to speak to low impact? He asked what low impact development is, and I'll let Aaron speak to it more specifically to Yarmouth.
So low impact development is sort of a term of art that can refer to a bunch of different design choices for development of a site. It can include simple green infrastructure, like building a swale to control stormwater so that it doesn't create erosion or create issues with that might be a downstream effect in terms of diverting a site's stormwater all towards one location. So that's at a lower end or a minimum or an easy way to implement something. Going to the opposite side is actually like a structural solution that's underground, where stormwater is directed into chambers, where it's then over time sort of allows it to percolate out back into the soil. So it is a term of art that is really related to how we're managing stormwater on any particular site, and can take a variety of forms, from pretty low lifts to more sophisticated ways to manage stormwater. Newer homes, for example, often have a drip edge around them, so that's like a gravel buffer around the foundation, where rather than it be soil, it prevents significant erosion if you don't have gutters in that area around your house, but it also enables that water to flow slowly back into the ground and potentially be directed away from a house towards a spot where the water has the chance to be reabsorbed into the earth. So I hope that helps. Great. And if you have any questions about low impact development, the town engineer loves to talk about it, and he would be happy to provide. I'm not being flip, but he does do stormwater training and goes through a number of informational points, both the planning board and the town council, but also the staff in town hall, so that we're all well aware of our responsibilities to manage stormwater within the community.
Can you outline what planning assumptions you've made about rising sea levels, both the timing and magnitude of that? I notice these exercises are designed to help us steer around those questions. If it's 5 feet in 5 years, I'm pretty goddamn concerned that it's a high priority item. If it's 2 inches in 50 years, I'm less concerned. So, I'm just wondering what the common truth we're operating
Yeah,
in.
I think I brought what they say for Yarmouth specifically. He was asking what the specific numbers are for sea level rise in Yarmouth. Definitely not 5 feet in 5 years, but definitely more than 2 inches in 100 years. Let me see. I printed off a lot of stats. Stay tuned. I'll find it though. Maybe not in this second, but I do have it. I'll find it and I'll let you guys all know before you do your activity. I think, is it 2.5 feet? Yeah.
At least for the state. So for the state climate action plan, the Maine Won't Wait plan, by 2050 they're expecting, as sort of the moderate estimate, 1.5 feet of sea level rise, and then by 2100 the moderate estimate is 3.9 feet of sea level rise. So I think that's probably what Yarmouth is using, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And yeah, we put, I think on our sea level rise, and I can't remember if we printed it tonight, but we did a lot of the 3 foot within that by 2050, just as that's the conservative rate that they put in the climate action plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Bina. My hope is that we will have some time at the end for reporting back out and maybe a little bit more question and answer. So I wanted to say just a couple of things. We will be taking a quick break, grab some food, grab some water, but also please do take a look. There's a chart at the front of the room that has to do with the Royal River and dam issues. And right over by the snacks is the draft vision statement for the town that was created last year. And I'd encourage everyone to spend a moment with that and think about what's in there that's good, maybe what's missing or not emphasized enough in that vision plan. That'll help the committee as we go forward. So before we break, I did want to explain there's 2 exercises we're going to be doing right after the break. And the first one has to do with the colored map, the large map in the middle of the table, about putting dots on the map for high priority, putting dots on the map for ecological valued spaces and natural areas, and putting dots on the map that has to do with places that are more important to protect for recreational access, whether it's active or passive recreation. There's also room for notes, and if you don't have Post-it notes on your table, we'll make sure that you have some to add those notes.
So, but can you clarify? What if it's both? What are we supposed to
You can put 2 dots, 1 of each color. So let me take a step back. The facilitator at every table, please raise your hand. Does every table have a facilitator? So maybe, Jamel, would you mind stepping into the table in the middle? Sure. Thank you. So your facilitator will be able to help with those questions. Aaron will be walking around. Bina will be walking around. I'll be walking around as well to answer some of these questions that come up as we go. So table... Great, and being and simply stating that there is among your maps, there's some smaller maps that are references, and one of those is an open space map. So the second exercise is maybe a little more complex. It's a list, it's hidden under your map, but when you get to it, we want you to put some indications as to what are the high priority topics from your perspective. But we also want you to think about it from another person's perspective. So on the table, your table facilitator will help pass out randomly. You'll be randomly assigned an alter ego. You'll get to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about open space, natural resources needs from their perspective as well. So you can do it twice. You do it once from your perspective and once from the other perspective. And we'll be walking around again for questions. So with that being said, why don't we take 5 minutes? Bathrooms are in the back, food's up front, and we'll reconvene in just a few. Thanks.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, living history. Want one more? You guys all set? Okay. I'm a widower who lives alone on Mountain Road. I'd like to get outside more to exercise. Road is right there. Mountford Road?
Okay, folks. Hey, raise your hands if the table you're at is all done. You're all set? table? Looks like everyone's all done. Good. We do have a few minutes left, and I think it'd be really great to just hear maybe in about a minute or a minute and a half from the facilitators at each table to kind of share some of the highlights from each exercise. Maybe not everything you talked about, but just some of the highlights. And we'll start right here with Tread at this table, and we'll go around. So, great.
Carolyn's going to represent us. I was a facilitator.
Okay.
She has very strong views about this, and we're all sort of
Yep. Come on right up.
we're on the same page. Here, you want to bring it up? Here. Why don't we assist? Sure. Here, that helps. I'll hold it up while you
Okay.
speak to it.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I guess I'm setting a model here. But my view is that there was a wonderful open space plan that the town passed in 2019. And as a part of that plan, a lot of mapping was done of ecological resources, of recreational resources, scenic resources, trails, all sorts of things. And priorities were set by looking at existing protected land and how those values of all these different systems interconnected. And so I think the best thing that we can do is, rather than repeating the process, to use those maps and begin protecting additional lands. And that was a top priority for us. We looked at areas, obviously, we looked at existing conservation and trying to consider augmenting that. We're not putting dots on specific pieces of property. I just want to make that clear. We weren't getting that refined. We were just kind of picking areas. So definitely around existing protected land and connecting that, perhaps with a bridge here. We also looked at, this is, I think, a Maine Coast Heritage Trust property here. So we were looking at, whether additional protection was needed along the Cousins and, of course, along the Royal River. And then we were looking out for recreational access. We were looking at what is going to happen to the power station, and that might be a really great area for access to the river. We were also looking at some smaller trails that are in the open space plan. For instance, if you live at Brookside, there are many people who walk through all the time to Pratt's Brook, but those aren't actually Yarmouth paths. And looking at all the paths the kids use informally and actually, establishing those, permanently. So I think is there anything else?
No. Should we
we
talk
were-
about our second chart
We were
as well?
thinking also about wildlife corridors, and we're just, the last thing that I was thinking about was we're going to need our forested parcels just as a carbon sink. And so the larger forested parcels in town become even more important now because we're facing climate change. So that was another thing I was kind of looking at. But yeah, let's talk about somebody. Brian, you take this.
I'm taking this? Okay. All right, fine. All right. In general, I think for us and our group, really investing in acquiring more conservation land was really the highest priority that we had. And then just basically environmental impacts, where we're looking at here, like river quality, marine habitat. Coastal access for like other recreations we really should have more of. There's a lot, other than the landing, I don't really feel like there's that much that we actually have access to in that regard. Let's see, anything else?
Educating large.
Well, I think both educating the large landowners for the benefits of the easements and conservation. That's a good way to get more land as people either age out of wanting to have that land, or their kids don't want to have that burden of cost in such things like that. And basically looking at removing the dams. Mostly is really what that comes down to, with the quality of improvements and restoring fish passage. I think we're mostly all thinking removal is probably the best bet. All right, anything else? All right, thank you.
And Jamie, is there someone from your table? Like you?
I think that would be someone's okay. Let's do map first. So we had a unique perspective getting to, did everyone do that with the alter ego? Okay, so we spent a good deal of time talking about accessibility issues related to recreational spaces in town and existing preserved land access for people with mobility issues. We also spent a decent amount of time talking about, similarly to the first group, the connectivity of our existing preserved lands. And then we also, I don't want to get too far away from the microphone, we also discussed preserving like the business access to the waters off of Yarmouth, particularly related to aquaculture businesses. I think, does that, all right. So, our priorities from both our personal perspectives and our alter ego perspectives were significantly, again, related to access for everyone to bodies of water, Royal River water quality, coastal access for accessibility of coastal access and for recreation and businesses. Yes, the fish passage, and then also educating landowners on benefits of easements for conservation and recreation. That's everything.
Thank you.
No, there's not much to show, but we, our table spent some time looking at the map and thinking about more about the blanket ideas that we had for town. So protecting thank you, the forested areas in town, the existing tree stands, existing accessibility, existing conserved lands, but making sure that those are preserved in perpetuity. We also talked about areas that are town-owned that are not protected, like Royal River Park, and adequate tree buffers along very busy areas, and protecting the wildlife crossings and their paths. What is that called? I'm blanking at corridors. Thank you. And then yes, we also touched upon our lovely power station and what the potentials for recreation and conservation are out there. Connectivity was a big conversation piece, so just making sure that there are many ways to get to Main Street that are safe and well marked, that kids can get around town and they can get out from the island into town, and that's well marked. I think that we did add to our priority list here, as what was missing was a mention of trees. So we added down here protecting the health of our existing tree canopy and increasing trees in town year on year, conserving forested areas. And so then we all marked that as a priority. Thank you.
Okay, I also want to say that this group did an excellent job of imagining perspectives other than their own. So you could see from the map, there were lots of insights similar to what Hildy mentioned about existing access, existing properties, in addition to future goal setting, priority, you could see consensus around acquiring, but also in terms of access, so ADA consideration, but also education. How much knowledge of it, or are these secret jewels that are hidden around town, known only by adjacent neighbors? So thinking about ways to improve that more equitably around the town. And I think other highlights from this group was consideration of the water also as a resource and discussion about.
That's why we have blue dots out in the water.
Yeah. So thinking about access to that as well. And then similar to the other groups, also adding notes at the bottom in terms of regional coordination, consideration of the tree canopy. And I think it was very interesting to hear the discussion, and maybe we have some planning board insight expertise as well, about the correlation between zoning, educating property owners, and also acquiring based on vulnerability from climate change, but also the priority set in terms of conservation, access, and wildlife corridors. So excellent job, they did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my group really loved dots and placing stickers on the maps. It was very exciting. We focused a lot on some existing preserved areas as well as adding to acquiring new lands to provide for additional wildlife habitat. And as you can see, there was some excitement related to a certain rail corridor that could provide some great recreation opportunities as well. And then with the list, there was a large focus on land acquisition again for conservation and preservation purposes, as well as recreation, along with a priority or prioritizing the Royal River for ecological and recreational opportunities as well. Thanks.
We said all those things, definitely. We're with you on almost everything, so I'll be really succinct. On the map exercise, we emphasize connections and missing links in trails and rails and all those. And public-private partnerships, we'd like to see a lot more access and protection for the future of things like the CMP, Florida Power Light, Xterra, whatever, corridor for wildlife and crossings and good stewardship. And then on the chart, Bill, we were emphasizing stewardship of the river, the estuaries such as Broad Cove, and a lot of interest in landowner education and stewardship with things like shoreland zoning best management practices.
Did you mention the Casco Bay Trail?
I did. I said rail to trail.
I was busy.
You're busy.
Great, thanks.
All right, last but not least. So in our table, we were focused on corridors for wildlife and protection of waterways. And so a lot of the stickies that we added on were on that theme. So we were looking for having more of a buffer than the Resource Protection District allows or provides on existing rivers and waterways. Where there are smaller creeks, like the Pitty Creek, that's not covered by shoreland overlay districts, we should have those covered. And where there are streams and there's supposed to be a buffer between the stream and construction buildings, we want to make sure that gets enforced. It seems to be a DEP permit, and the town doesn't necessarily look at that. But all of these areas that surround water, which are important for wildlife corridors as well as water quality, were things that we focused on.
Great.
And on the other one, we thought lots of things were important. There weren't real clear winners, except there were 3 high priorities for the coastal water quality improvement.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That was a great summary from the tables. I wanted to see if there are any other questions. We've got time for maybe 2 or 3 questions or comments if people have any questions for Bina or Aaron or the planning team as we continue our work. Otherwise, maybe we can hand it over to Aaron to wrap it up.
I have one question. This is a great process you're going through. When do you actually expect to have a draft that might be available for a comment? And then specifically, how do you see this plan interfacing with the climate action plan that's due out as early as November?
Maybe start it and I'll finish it.
Okay. The comprehensive plan, we are aiming to have a draft ready for public review this spring. The inventory chapters are drafted, and we've received a lot of good comments on those. Those are going to be revised over the course of the winter, but we're going to be pulling all of those together with the information we've gotten from sessions like this and from the survey that was conducted earlier, as well as the upcoming future land use workshop on November 13th, and putting a first draft of plan ready for the spring.
And I think related to the relationship with the climate action plan, so yes, that is on a sort of a different timeline, well, definitely a different timeline than the comprehensive plan, with the goal to be adopted by the end of the year. I think that there's a lot of, there's clear overlap and there's clear relationships between the two plans, and in particular how they will be implemented in conjunction. I think regardless of what is sort of without, I guess where I'm struggling is because we don't necessarily know what our implementation plan will look like or our action plan will look like right now. And Medi and her team and YCAT is working on that, and they'll get a lot of feedback next Tuesday. So I think I'm struggling with a response because I don't necessarily know what the two plans will look like to talk about how they will be coordinated, but they can't not be coordinated. And I think some of that comes up in the implementation of the two plans. There will be a lot of overlap that I see from my position and from attending these meetings and being a resource to Medi. And I think pulling those pieces together is going to be key on our end when we go to implement it. The same thing could be said with aspects of other planning processes that are older in the community. The open space plan has come up a bit tonight. So I think there is some looking back at what we've done already as a community and thinking about what else out of those plans could be advanced as part of this project, but then also creating that the way to really synthesize and the other word that I'm struggling to remember right now, but to coordinate the actual implementation of these two plans that will have very overlapping timelines of implementation so that we're not at odds or being inconsistent with each other. So kind of a non-answer answer for the moment, but I think more to come on that.
That's actually very helpful.
Great. And I guess I will wrap it up. So I did reference the Climate Action Plan workshop next Tuesday. It's in this room. You will see the different team there. So it will be Medi Smith, our sustainability coordinator, the YCAT team, and the Greater Portland Council of Governments, which is their consultant. You'll see some familiar faces, myself included, attended there. Hope that everyone can join us for continuing the conversation. And then again, in mid-November, on November 13th, for our future land use forum, where we're going to start to pull all these pieces together and talk about what this might look like on the ground in Yarmouth. So again, hope you can all join. Definitely check out the online activities if you weren't able to join us for housing and economy. And note that probably within the week or so, our online activities and the recording of this session tonight will be available online. So the best way to get to that is through the project website, planyarmouth.com, or feel free to reach out to the planning department with any questions or concerns. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you so much.